A trail of dust billows behind a solitary rider traversing the rugged Montana wilderness. The year is 1992, and in the small town of Thunder Valley, dark secrets lurk beneath the weathered boardwalks and behind weather-beaten doors. A rifle shot echoes across the valley, followed by the distinctive ping of a tin can being launched high into the air, only to be struck again before it hits the ground, a sound that would soon become legendary in this frontier settlement. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun bathes the Blackwood Ranch in golden light as 20-year-old Clara Blackwood moves with practiced efficiency through her daily routine. Her sun-weathered hands tell a story of hard work and dedication, but they conceal an even more remarkable talent, one she's kept hidden from nearly everyone in Thunder Valley. The crowing of roosters mingles with the lowing of cattle as she makes her way through the corral, her grandfather's brass compass swinging gently from the chain around her neck. The ranch sprawls across a picturesque valley just north of town, a testament to 3 generations of Blackwood determination. Clara's father, William, has transformed every acre through years of backbreaking work and unwavering perseverance. 10 years of harsh winters, summer droughts, and relentless challenges have forged this land into something worth protecting at all costs. The peaceful morning rhythm is shattered by the distant thunder of hoofbeats, multiple riders approaching from the south. Clara's hand instinctively moves to her hip, where a revolver would normally rest, but she catches herself. Not here, not now. The Blackwood Ranch has always been a place of peace. Despite the hardships they've endured, the imposing 2-story ranch house, its timbers aged but strong, stands as a monument to William Blackwood's fierce determination. The newly constructed barn, its fresh-cut pine boards still fragrant in the morning air, houses not only their prized horses but also the memories of happier times when her mother would sing as she worked, her voice carrying across the meadows. Like a spring breeze, 4 riders emerge from the morning haze, their horses' hooves kicking up clouds of dust as they approach the ranch house. Leading them is Marcus the Snake Thorne, his reputation for ruthlessness preceding him like storm clouds before a tempest. The silver chains adorning his black vest catch the morning light, matching the cold gleam in his eyes. Behind him, the Drake brothers, Samuel and Joshua, spread out as they near the house, their intentions clear in their practiced movements. Samuel the elder bears a distinctive scar across his cheek, while Joshua's youthful face barely masks his predatory nature. "Morning, Miss Blackwood," Thorne calls out, his voice carrying a serpentine charm. "Fine day for a discussion about property boundaries, wouldn't you say?" He tips his black hat, a gesture that makes Clara's skin crawl. His horse, a massive blood-bay stallion, paws at the ground impatiently, as if sharing its rider's malevolent intent. William Blackwood emerges from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag, his weathered face showing no fear. But Clara knows her father well enough to see the tension in his shoulders. The past decade has etched deep lines in his once youthful face, threads of silver running through his dark hair, but his spine remains straight as a lodgepole pine. "We've been through this, Thorne," he says firmly. "Our property lines were settled by the territorial court. We paid fair and square for every acre." Thorne's smile doesn't reach his eyes. "Ah, but you see, Mr. Blackwood, there have been some changes in Thunder Valley. Mr. Hawthorne's taken a special interest in this region. He's offering to buy up all the ranches for a generous price." His hand rests casually on his holstered revolver, a custom-made Colt that's left more than its share of widows and orphans across the territory. Clara watches the exchange from near the water pump, her heart pounding against her ribs. Everyone in the territory knows about Richard Ironhand Hawthorne, a man who built his cattle empire on broken promises and unmarked graves. The stories they whisper about him in the back room of McPherson's saloon, would make even the most hardened frontiersman think twice about crossing him. "This land's not for sale," William replies, his voice steady as steel. "Never has been, never will be. My father's buried on this property, Thorne. You know that." The Drake brothers exchange meaningful glances, their hands hovering near their weapons. But Thorne raises a hand, maintaining his false civility. "No need for hasty decisions, Mr. Blackwood. We'll give you time to think it over. Say, until the harvest moon." His smile widens, though its warmth never touches his cold eyes. "Though I should mention, accidents tend to happen to folks who take too long to make up their minds." The morning sun seems to dim as Thorne speaks, as if nature itself recoils from his threats. A hawk screams from atop the barn, its cry splitting the tension like a knife. As they turn to leave, Joshua Drake's eyes linger on Clara for a moment too long, his gaze crawling over her like a physical touch. "Shame if anything were to happen to your pretty daughter, old man," he calls out, earning a sharp look from Thorne. That does nothing to mask the threat. Once the riders are gone, Clara rushes to her father's side. "Pa, we can't let them—" "No," William cuts her off, his voice stern but trembling slightly. "We're not going to do anything rash. I'll ride into town tomorrow. Speak with Marshal Harrison." He places a calloused hand on her shoulder, his touch gentle despite years of hard labor. "Your mother wouldn't want us starting trouble." Clara bites her lip, knowing what she has to do, but unable to tell her father. As soon as the sun sets, she'll make her way up into the high country to the hidden cabin where old Jack Deadeye Mitchell taught her everything she knows about handling a rifle. The same old Jack who helped her mother perfect her shot years ago, before consumption took her from them. The legacy of Sarah Golden Eye Blackwood didn't die with her mother. It just went underground, like a seed waiting for the right moment to sprout. The rest of the day passes in tense silence, father and daughter going about their chores while both their minds race with unspoken worries. As evening approaches, dark clouds gather on the horizon, promising a storm that matches the brewing trouble in Thunder Valley. The wind picks up, carrying with it the scent of rain and the whispers of coming violence. What no one in town knows, not the marshal, not Richard Hawthorne, and especially not Marcus Thorne, is that Clara Blackwood isn't just some rancher's daughter. In a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards of her room lies a rifle case that belonged to her mother. The stock of the Winchester within is worn smooth by years of use, its brass fittings gleaming dully in the fading light. It's been waiting, patiently, just like Clara, for the moment when hiding would no longer be an option. The name Golden Eye Blackwood didn't die with her mother. It just went into hiding, waiting for the right moment to resurface. And as Clara watches the sun set behind the gathering storm clouds, she knows that moment is coming sooner than anyone expects. The mountain path twists treacherously through the darkness as Clara guides her horse beneath the cloud-covered moon. She's made this journey countless times before, but tonight feels different. The weight of her mother's rifle, wrapped carefully in oilcloth and strapped securely beneath her riding coat, reminds her of everything at stake. Lightning flashes in the distance, illuminating the craggy terrain that few dare to traverse after nightfall. Old Jack's cabin lies just beyond the next ridge, nestled in a hollow where the townspeople rarely venture. Her horse, a fleet-footed paint mare named Shadow, knows the path well enough to navigate the treacherous terrain even in near darkness. The animal's ears prick forward at every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves, sharing her rider's heightened alertness. Clara's thoughts drift to the morning's confrontation, to Thorne's serpentine smile and the way Joshua Drake had looked at her like a wolf sizing up its prey. As she approaches the cabin, she spots the familiar glow of lamplight through the weathered windows. Smoke curls from the chimney, carrying the scent of coffee and pipe tobacco into the night air. Before she can even dismount, the cabin door creaks open, and Jack Deadeye Mitchell's gruff voice breaks the silence. Bit late for social calls, ain't it, girl? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The old man steps into view, his silver hair gleaming in the lantern light. Despite his advanced years, his posture remains straight as a ramrod, and his eyes miss nothing. A Sharp's buffalo rifle rests easily in his hands. Old Jack never opens his door unarmed, unless this visit has something to do with those vultures I saw circling your ranch this morning. Clara ties Shadow to the hitching post, her movements deliberate. You saw them then? Snakethorn and his boys? Old Jack spits into the dirt. Been watching that sorry lot make their rounds. Hawthorne's getting bolder, sending them to your place. He gestures toward the cabin. Come on in. Reckon it's time we had a serious talk. Inside the cabin is sparse but meticulously organized. Gun racks line the walls, each weapon cleaned and maintained with religious dedication. Wanted posters from territories across the West paper one wall. Some so old the ink has faded, others fresh enough that the reward money still tempts. A pot of coffee bubbles on the wood stove, and old Jack pours 2 cups before settling into his favorite chair. Its leather worn smooth by years of use. Your mother knew this day might come, he says, his voice softening at the mention of his former pupil. Why do you think she made me promise to teach you everything I taught her? Sarah wasn't just accurate with a rifle, she was smart. Knew. Trouble follows certain kinds of talent, no matter how deep you try to bury it. Clara wraps her hands around the warm coffee cup, remembering her mother's gentle hands and fierce spirit. Pa wants to talk to Marshal Harrison tomorrow. Old Jack's laugh is bitter as a winter wind. James Harrison is a good man, but his hands are tied. Hawthorne's got half the territory's judges in his pocket, and the other half too scared to move against him. He sets his cup down with a decisive clink. No, girl, time for talking's done. Rising from his chair, old Jack moves to a locked trunk in the corner. The key hangs from a chain around his neck, and Clara watches as he opens it with reverent care. From within, he withdraws a wooden box, inlaid with copper, its surface etched with intricate designs that catch the lamplight. Your mother's pride and joy, he says, opening the box to reveal a set of custom-made rifle sights, made by the finest gunsmith in St. Louis. She only used them once, in that business down in Helena. 800 yards, 3 shots, 3 rustlers who needed stopping. The territorial marshal himself said it was the finest shooting he'd ever witnessed. Clara's eyes widened. She'd heard whispers of her mother's legendary marksmanship, but never the full stories. Why didn't she keep them? Because your father asked her to give up that life when you were born, and she loved him enough to do it. Old Jack carefully lifts one of the sights. But she was smart enough to know that sometimes trouble finds you whether you're looking for it or not. For the next hour, old Jack drills Clara relentlessly. They move outside to the shooting range he's set up behind the cabin, where targets of varying sizes and distances challenge even the most skilled marksman. Clara loads, aims, and fires with fluid grace, her movements a dance passed down through blood and practice. The night air fills with the sharp crack of rifle fire and the metallic ping of bullets finding their marks. You're more steady than your mother was, old Jack observes as Clara splits a playing card at 80 yards. But steadiness ain't everything. Tomorrow we work on speed. Hawthorne's men won't give you time to set up the perfect shot. They're snakes, a lot of them. They'll try to get inside your head first, making you doubt yourself. That's when mistakes happen. He demonstrates a rapid-fire technique, his weathered hands still swift and sure. See, your mother understood something most sharpshooters never learn. It ain't about being the most accurate. It's about being smarter than the other fellow, reading his intentions before he even knows them himself. As Clara and old Jack wrap up their training session, a horse's whinny breaks the night's silence. Both freeze, weapons ready. From the shadows emerges Catherine Harrison, the marshal's daughter, her face pale in the moonlight. Her dark hair is windblown, and her riding clothes suggest she left town in a hurry. "Clara," Catherine's voice trembles. "I followed you. I had to know where you've been sneaking off to all these nights." Her eyes dart between Clara's, rifle and old Jack's stern face. "My father, he just got word. Hawthorne's men burned out the Anderson family last night. Their ranch is just east of yours." Clara's blood runs cold. The Andersons had 3 young children. "Did they? They got out in time," Catherine says quickly, dismounting from her horse. "But they lost everything. Father's furious, but the territorial judge says there's no evidence linking it to Hawthorne." She takes a shaky breath, her hands clutching her saddle horn for support. "There's more. I overheard Samuel Drake talking in McPherson's. They're not just after the land anymore. Hawthorne's looking for something specific, something he thinks is buried on your property." Old Jack and Clara exchange glances. They both know what Hawthorne must be after. The cache of Confederate gold that Clara's mother had helped hide during the war, mapped only in a coded journal that now sits beside her mother's rifle sights. "Catherine," Clara says slowly, lowering her Winchester, "how good are you at keeping secrets?" Thunder rolls in the distance as Catherine steps forward into the lantern light. Her decision is made, her voice steady now, her father's determination shining through. "Better than anyone knows, and I want to help. Whatever you're planning, whatever this is, I'm in." Old Jack surveys the 2 young women, a plan already forming in his mind. The old marksman sees something familiar in their determination. The same fire he'd seen in Sarah Blackwood's eyes all those years ago. "Well then," he says, reaching for another box of ammunition, "reckon we've got a lot of work to do before sunrise, and something tells me we're going to need every minute of it." Dawn breaks over Thunder Valley with an uneasy stillness. William, Blackwood's wagon rattles down the main street, kicking up dust as he makes his way to the marshal's office. The town is already stirring. Miners heading to their claims, shopkeepers opening their doors, and the occasional group of cowhands stumbling out of McPherson's saloon after a long night. Inside the marshal's office, James Harrison sits behind, his desk examining a fresh wanted poster. His silver star catches the morning light as he looks up at William's entrance. The lines around his eyes deepen with concern as he recognizes his visitor. "William," he says, rising from his chair, "I was hoping you'd come by. Heard about Thorne's visit to your place yesterday." He gestures to an empty chair, but William remains standing, his hat clutched in weathered hands. "Jim, they burned out the Andersons," William says without preamble. "Now they're threatening my Clara. This has to stop." The marshal's jaw tightens. "I know. But proving Hawthorne's behind it," he shakes his head. "That man's got more layers of protection than a rattler's got scales. Even the territorial judges are backing off." Through the window, they watch as Richard Hawthorne himself rides past, his black duster immaculate, flanked by Marcus Thorne and Joshua Drake. The townspeople scatter like leaves in a wind, ducking into doorways or averting their eyes. "Speak of the devil," Harrison mutters. "He's been buying up judges faster than he's buying land. 3 good lawmen in neighboring counties have already turned in their badges. Can't say I blame them after what happened to Marshal Parker over in Pine." "Ridge." William's knuckles whiten around his hat brim. "What about the army? Surely The army's got their hands full with Indian troubles up north," Harrison interrupts. "Besides, on paper, everything Hawthorne does is legal. Man could steal your soul and have a contract proving you sold it to him." The conversation is interrupted by McPherson bursting through the door, his usually composed demeanor shaken. His red beard is disheveled, and his breath comes in quick gasps. "Marshal!" "There's trouble at the bank. The Drake brothers. They're escorting folks to withdraw their savings, saying it's for their own protection," Harrison curses, reaching for his gun belt. "William, we'll finish this later. McPherson, get word to Deputy Collins. Tell him to Gunshot echoes from the direction of the bank, followed by screams. Through the window, they see people running for cover as Samuel Drake emerges onto the bank's porch, rifle in hand. His brother Joshua follows, dragging elderly Mr. Patterson, the bank manager, by his collar. "Listen up, good people of Thunder Valley." Samuel's voice booms across the street. "Mr. Hawthorne's concerned about the safety of your hard-earned money. Seems some unsavory elements have been planning to rob this establishment. But don't you worry, we'll be providing security from now on." Marshal Harrison steps out onto the street, his hand resting on his holstered gun. "That's enough, Drake. Let Patterson go." "What, Marshal?" Joshua sneers, giving the bank manager a shake. "You're going to arrest us for protecting the town's interests? We got papers making us official bank security, signed by the territorial judge himself." William watches from the marshal's office doorway as the scene unfolds. His eyes narrow as he spots Marcus Thorne watching from the shadows of the gunsmith's shop, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. Inside the bank, more of Hawthorne's men are helping townspeople empty their accounts. Catherine Harrison, who works as a teller, stands rigid behind her counter, her face pale but determined as she's forced to process withdrawals that everyone knows will never be seen again. The marshal's hands are tied, and everyone knows it. With the territorial judge's signature on those papers, any action against Hawthorne's men would be seen as obstruction of legal business. "This is how it starts," McPherson whispers to William. "First the ranches, now the bank. Soon he'll own every business in town." He pauses, then adds in an even lower voice, "But there's talk of resistance, secret meetings out at the old mission, people who ain't willing to let Hawthorne steal everything they've built." William's response is cut short by the arrival of Richard Hawthorne himself, riding up to the bank on his gleaming black stallion. The man cuts an imposing figure, his iron-grey hair and expensive clothes a stark contrast to the dusty town around him. "Is there a problem here, Marshal?" Hawthorne's voice is cultured, almost gentle, but there's steel beneath the silk. "I'm simply trying to protect my neighbor's interests. Times are uncertain, after all. Why, just look at what happened to the poor Anderson family." The threat in his words is clear as a rattler's warning. Marshal Harrison can only watch as Hawthorne dismounts, straightening his black leather gloves with deliberate care. "Mr. Blackwood," Hawthorne calls out, noticing William in the doorway, "have you given any more thought to my generous offer? I'd hate to see your lovely daughter face any unfortunate accidents." Before William can respond, a new figure appears. On the scene, Clara Blackwood rides into town, her arrival drawing all eyes. She sits tall in the saddle, her grandfather's brass compass catching the morning sun. If she's afraid of the armed men surrounding the bank, she shows no sign of it. "Good morning, Mr. Hawthorne," she calls out, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent street. "I believe you were just threatening my father." Her hand rests casually near her hip, where her riding coat conceals a holstered Colt. But it's not the pistol that gives her confidence. It's the knowledge that her mother's Winchester is within easy reach, secured to her saddle in a way old Jack had shown her. For just a moment, something like uncertainty flickers across Hawthorne's face. Then his practiced smile returns, though it doesn't reach his eyes. "Why, Miss Blackwood, you mistake me. I'm simply looking out for the welfare of this fine community. Is that what you told the Andersons?" Clara's voice is steel wrapped in silk, matching Hawthorne's own tone. The morning sun catches her face, highlighting a determination that reminds the older townsfolk of another Blackwood woman who once stood up to bullies and thieves. The tension in the street builds like a thunderhead, and everyone present knows that Thunder Valley has just become a powder keg, waiting for a spark. The afternoon sun beats down mercilessly on Thunder Valley as Clara Blackwood makes her way to McPherson's saloon. The morning's confrontation at the bank has left the town holding its breath, waiting to see who will make the next move. Inside the saloon, the usual afternoon crowd is notably thinner, folks staying home to avoid trouble. McPherson is behind the bar, mechanically polishing glasses while keeping one eye on the Drake brothers, who've claimed a corner table. Their loud laughter carries an edge of menace that sets everyone's teeth on edge. Clara slides onto a bar stool, her back to the wall just as old Jack taught her. "Brave of you to show your face in town after this morning," McPherson murmurs, sliding a glass of sarsaparilla across the bar. His green eyes dart meaningfully toward the back room. "Got some friends waiting to talk to you." Clara makes her way to the back room, passing the Drake brothers. Joshua raises his glass in mock salute, but she ignores him. In the private room she finds Catherine Harrison, Reverend Walsh, and 3 of the displaced ranchers whose land Hawthorne had already claimed. "We've been waiting," Catherine says, closing the door behind Clara. "Father's beside himself after what happened at the bank. Half the town's savings are gone, just like that." Reverend Walsh, his collar wilting in the heat, spreads a map across the table. "The old mission's become too obvious for meetings. Hawthorne's men have been watching it, but there's something else you need to see." His finger traces a path through the mountains. "These markers here, your mother left them, didn't she?" Clara studies the map, recognizing her mother's distinctive hand in the subtle marks that most would mistake for random ink spots. "How did you know?" "Because Sarah Blackwood wasn't just protecting Confederate gold," the Reverend says quietly. "She was protecting documents that could bring down half the corrupt officials in the territory, including the judge who's been signing Hawthorne's papers." A commotion from the main room interrupts their discussion. Marcus Thorne's voice rises, above the general din, demanding information about recent meetings at the mission. The sound of breaking glass follows, then a woman's cry of protest. Clara's hand moves to her concealed weapon, but Catherine grabs her arm. "Wait," she whispers. "We need to be smart about this." The door bursts open, revealing Thorne flanked by the Drake brothers, his eyes sweeping the room and taking in the gathered group and the hastily folded map. "Well, well," he drawls, "ain't this cozy? Having ourselves a little social club, are we?" His gaze fixes on Clara. "Miss Blackwood, Mr. Hawthorne was mighty impressed by your performance this morning. Said you reminded him of someone. Your mother, perhaps?" Clara rises slowly, positioning herself between Thorne and the others. "My mother died of consumption 4 years ago, Mr. Thorne. But you already knew that, didn't you? Since you were there in Helena when she retired." Something flickers in Thorne's eyes. Recognition, maybe fear. "Smart girl, too smart for your own good, just like her." His hand inches toward his gun. "You know what we're really after, don't you? The gold's just a bonus. It's those documents we want." "I don't know what you're talking about," Clara replies, evenly though her heart pounds against her ribs. "No?" Thorne's smile is ugly now. "Maybe we should ask your father." "He's having a nice chat with Mr. Hawthorne right now at the big house," Catherine gasps, but Clara's expression doesn't change. "You're lying. My father's at the ranch." "Is he?" Joshua Drake laughs. "Funny. I could have sworn I saw him riding toward Hawthorne's place about an hour ago. Real urgent-like. The temperature in the room seems to drop 10 degrees. Clara's mind races, calculating angles, distances, possibilities. There are 3 of them, all armed, but in close quarters, where her rifle skills won't help. The others. Behind her are civilians, except Catherine, who she knows can handle herself thanks to old Jack's training. "Now," Thorne continues, "why don't you tell us where those documents are, and maybe your father won't have to test Mr. Hawthorne's hospitality for too long." Clara's response is a blur of motion. Her Colt seems to materialize in her hand as she flips the heavy oak table, providing cover for the others. Catherine's derringer appears as if by magic, and the back room erupts in gunfire. Thorne dives for cover as Clara's first shot takes Joshua Drake in the shoulder, spinning him into his brother. Reverend Walsh hustles the ranchers toward the back exit as Catherine provides covering fire. McPherson's voice rings out from the main room, the distinct sound of his shotgun being cocked, cutting through the chaos. "Clara, go!" Catherine shouts, her small gun barking twice more. "Find your father. We'll handle things here." Clara doesn't waste time arguing. She slips out the back door into the alley, the sounds of gunfire fading behind her as she runs toward her horse. She spots one of Hawthorne's men, Michael "Shadowhand" Cooper, watching from a rooftop, making no move to stop her. Their eyes meet briefly, and she sees something unexpected there, reluctance, maybe even sympathy. Mounting Shadow in one fluid motion, Clara spurs her horse toward Hawthorne's mansion on the hill. Behind her, Thunder Valley erupts into chaos as the townspeople's simmering resentment finally boils over. Smoke rises from the bank as someone, probably McPherson, decides to retrieve the town's savings by force. The sound of hoofbeats makes her turn in the saddle. Two riders are following her, the Drake brothers, both looking worse for wear but determined. Up ahead, storm clouds gather over Hawthorne's mansion, as if nature itself is preparing for what's to come. Clara checks her mother's Winchester, remembering old Jack's words, "Sometimes trouble finds you whether you're looking for it or not." Well, she's done hiding from trouble. It's time to show Richard Hawthorne exactly what kind of woman he's been foolish enough to underestimate. As she rides, her grandfather's compass bounces against her chest with each gallop. Inside, hidden, behind its worn face, is a small key, one that matches the strongbox buried beneath the Blackwood Ranch's old cottonwood tree. The same tree where her mother had taught her to shoot, where they'd spent countless hours practicing, until her hands were steady and her eye was true. Clara rises slowly, positioning herself between Thorne and the others. "My mother died of consumption 4 years ago, Mr. Thorne. But you already knew that, didn't you? Since you were there in Helena when she retired." Something flickers in Thorne's eyes. Recognition. Maybe fear. "Smart girl. Too smart for your own good. Just like her." His hand inches toward his gun. "You know what we're really after, don't you? The gold's just a bonus. It's those documents we want." "I don't know what you're talking about," Clara replies, evenly, though her heart pounds against her ribs. "No?" Thorne's smile is ugly now. "Maybe we should ask your father. He's having a nice chat with Mr. Hawthorne right now at the big house." Catherine gasps, but Clara's expression doesn't change. "You're lying. My father's at the ranch." "Is he?" Joshua Drake laughs. "Funny. I could have sworn I saw him riding toward Hawthorne's place about an hour ago. Real urgent-like. The temperature in the room seems to drop 10 degrees. Clara's mind races, calculating angles, distances, possibilities. There are 3 of them, all armed, but in close quarters, where her rifle skills won't help. The others. Behind her are civilians, except Catherine, who she knows can handle herself thanks to old Jack's training. "Now," Thorne continues, "why don't you tell us where those documents are, and maybe your father won't have to test Mr. Hawthorne's hospitality for too long." Clara's response is a blur of motion. Her Colt seems to materialize in her hand as she flips the heavy oak table, providing cover for the others. Catherine's Derringer appears as if by magic, and the back room erupts in gunfire. Thorne dives for cover as Clara's first shot takes Joshua Drake in the shoulder, spinning him into his brother. Reverend Walsh hustles the ranchers toward the back exit as Catherine provides covering fire. McPherson's voice rings out from the main room, the distinct sound of his shotgun being cocked, cutting through the chaos. "Clara, go!" Catherine shouts, her small gun barking twice more. "Find your father. We'll handle things here." Clara doesn't waste time arguing. She slips out the back door into the alley, the sounds of gunfire fading behind her as she runs toward her horse. She spots one of Hawthorne's men, Michael "Shadowhand" Cooper, watching from a rooftop, making no move to stop her. Their eyes meet briefly, And she sees something unexpected there, reluctance, maybe even sympathy. Mounting shadow in one fluid motion, Clara spurs her horse toward Hawthorne's mansion on the hill. Behind her, Thunder Valley erupts into chaos as the townspeople's simmering resentment finally boils over. Smoke rises from the bank as someone, probably McPherson, decides to retrieve the town's savings by force. The sound of hoofbeats makes her turn in the saddle. Two riders are following her, the Drake brothers, both looking worse for wear but determined. Up ahead, storm clouds gather over Hawthorne's mansion, as if nature itself is preparing for what's to come. Clara checks her mother's Winchester, remembering old Jack's words. Sometimes trouble finds you, whether you're looking for it or not. Well, she's done hiding from trouble. It's time to show Richard Hawthorne exactly what kind of woman he's been foolish enough to underestimate. As she rides, her grandfather's compass bounces against her chest with each gallop. Inside, hidden, behind its worn face, is a small key, one that matches the strongbox buried beneath the Blackwood Ranch's old cottonwood tree. The same tree where her mother had taught her to shoot, where they'd spent countless hours practicing until her hands were steady and her eye was true. Enough! Hawthorne hurls his glass into the fireplace. Those documents die with you, William, and then your daughter will tell me where the gold is, or she'll watch everything she loves burn. Clara's seen enough. She kicks the door fully open. Winchester raised. Why not ask me yourself, Mr. Hawthorne? The room freezes. Thorne starts to turn, but Clara's first shot sends his gun flying. Her second catches him in the leg, dropping him to the floor. Hawthorne reaches for a hidden derringer, but Clara's third shot splinters the desk beside his hand. I wouldn't, she says coldly. Mother always said you were slow on the draw. Outside, the gunfire has intensified. Through the study's window, Clara catches glimpses of townspeople arriving, led by Marshal Harrison and McPherson. The Drake brothers are nowhere to be seen. You're just like her, Hawthorne snarls, nursing his hand. Think you can save everyone, change everything, but you're surrounded, girl. My men will be here any second. Clara's smile is sharp as a knife. You mean the men Cooper turned against you? Or the ones too busy dealing with an angry town? She moves to untie her father, Winchester still trained on Hawthorne and Thorne. Face it, Richard, your empire is falling apart. The gold, Hawthorne says desperately. Tell me where it is, and I'll let you both walk out of here. The gold was never real, William laughs, rubbing his wrists as Clara frees him. Just a story Sarah spread to keep you chasing shadows while she gathered evidence against you and your corrupt judges. A look of horrified realization crosses Hawthorne's face as Clara moves to the painting behind his desk. The safe combination clicks beneath her fingers. April 12th, just as Cooper said. Inside, she finds not only the documents her mother died protecting, but evidence of 2 decades of corruption, murder, and theft. Thunder crashes outside as Clara faces the man who's haunted her family for so long. My mother taught me more than just how to shoot, Mr. Hawthorne. She taught me that justice always finds its mark, one way or another. Lightning splits the sky above Hawthorne's mansion as the situation reaches its boiling point. Through the study windows, Clara can see the townspeople gathering below, their numbers growing despite the driving rain. Their lanterns flicker like fireflies in the darkness, illuminating determined faces she's known all her life. Marshal Harrison's voice carries over the storm, demanding Hawthorne's surrender. But Richard Hawthorne isn't finished yet. His hand inches toward his desk drawer while he keeps Clara talking, his cultured accent growing more pronounced with desperation. You think these papers mean anything? He sneers, blood from his wounded hand staining his expensive suit. I own judges from here to Kansas City. This territory runs on my money, flows with it like the very lifeblood of progress. Not anymore, William Blackwood says, moving to stand beside his daughter. His voice carries the weight of years of quiet endurance, finally finding release. Cooper's already riding for the federal marshal with copies of everything. Been planning this for months, haven't you, Michael? From the doorway, Cooper materializes like his namesake, his dark clothes still dripping from the rain outside. Ever since I found out what really happened to Mrs. Hawthorne, he says quietly, his hand resting on his holstered gun. Fever was it, Richard? Strange how that fever left bruises on her neck. Strange how the doctor who treated her had an unfortunate accident the next day. Clara blocks his next swing with her Colt, the clash of steel on steel ringing out above the storm. Sparks fly from the impact, briefly illuminating their faces in the darkness. "You're wrong!" she grits out, feeling the strength in his desperate attack. Thunder Valley never belonged to you. It belongs to the people you've been stealing from, the lives you've been destroying. A tremendous thunderclap shakes the mansion as Clara kicks Hawthorne's knee out from under him. He staggers, but manages to catch her gun hand with the sabre's crossguard, sending her Colt skittering away to join her Winchester. Now unarmed, Clara faces Hawthorne across the rain-slicked balcony. Lightning illuminates the madness in his eyes as he raises the saber for a killing blow, his fine clothes now soaked and muddy, his true nature finally revealed for all to see. But old Jack didn't just teach her how to shoot, he taught her how to survive. Clara ducks under the swing and drives her shoulder into Hawthorne's midsection, using his own momentum against him. They crash together through the balcony's French doors into his trophy room, glass shattering around them like a crystal rain. Hawthorne loses his grip on the saber, but his hands find Clara's throat, fingers digging in with the strength of desperate hatred. "I should have killed you along with your mother," he snarls, fingers tightening. "Should have burned you all out years ago when Sarah first started gathering her precious evidence." Clara's hand closes around something solid, one of Hawthorne's precious trophies, a silver shooting cup won in some long-ago competition. "My mother," she chokes out, vision starting to dim around the edges, "sends her regards." The heavy silver cup connects with his temple with a satisfying crack, and Richard Hawthorne, the self-proclaimed king of Thunder Valley, crumples like a house of cards. When Marshal Harrison and Catherine finally reach them, they find Clara standing over Hawthorne's unconscious form, blood dripping from her arm, but her head held high. Outside, the storm begins to ease as dawn approaches, and with it comes the sound of hoofbeats. The federal marshal's men have arrived, their horses' hooves drumming a rhythm of approaching justice on the rain-soaked road to Thunder Valley. The first rays of morning sun pierce through the storm clouds as Dr. Anderson works frantically to save William Blackwood's life. The mansion's opulent dining room has been transformed into a makeshift surgery, with Catherine Harrison and McPherson assisting. Clara paces nearby, her own wound hastily bandaged, refusing to leave her father's side. "The bullet missed his heart," Dr. Anderson announces, his skilled hands moving with practiced precision. "But he's lost a lot of blood. We need to get him somewhere clean and quiet to recover." He looks up at Clara, his eyes kind but serious. "Your father's a fighter, Miss Blackwood. Always has been. Outside, the federal marshal's men are taking control of the situation. The sound of hoofbeats and shouted orders fills the air as Hawthorne's remaining loyal men are rounded up. The Drake brothers hadn't survived their final stand. Their bodies now lay covered in the garden they'd once terrorized. Marshal Harrison enters, his badge gleaming in the morning light. "Federal boys just finished securing the premises," he reports. "Found a whole strong room full of evidence, ledgers, contracts, letters, Hawthorne's empire's falling apart faster than a house of cards in a windstorm." He pauses, looking at William. "How is he?" "He'll live," Dr. Anderson responds, without looking up from his work. "No thanks to Marcus Thorne." The mention of Thorne's name draws Clara's attention to the window. From here, she can see several bodies being carried out, including Thorne's, his final expression of surprise still frozen on his face. Michael Cooper stands nearby, giving his Statement to a federal agent, his usual shadows and silenced demeanor replaced by forthright cooperation. Catherine approaches Clara, holding out a familiar wooden box. "Found this downstairs," she says softly, opening it to reveal Clara's mother's Winchester. "Thought you might want it back." Clara takes the rifle reverently, checking it for damage, before slinging it across her back. "Thank you, Catherine, for everything." She glances at her friend. "What about your father? Is he looking at a promotion?" Catherine says with a small smile, "The federal marshal was mighty impressed with how he handled things, gathering evidence these past months without tipping Hawthorne off. They're talking about making him a territorial marshal once the dust settles." Macpherson joins them, wiping blood from his hands, some from treating wounded townspeople, some from the fighting itself. "Town's already changing," he reports. "People are opening up their homes to the Anderson family and the others." Hawthorne drove out. Everyone's pitching in to help rebuild. Through the window, they can see Reverend Walsh leading a group of townspeople up the mansion's drive, carrying food and supplies for those who'd fought through the night. The morning sun catches his silver cross as he stops to offer comfort. "To a wounded man, Richard Hawthorne's being taken to the territorial prison," Marshal Harrison adds, his voice carrying satisfaction. "Along with that corrupt judge and half the territorial council. Cooper's testimony alone would hang them, but with Sarah's documents..." He shakes his head in amazement. "Your mother was building this case for years, wasn't she?" Clara nods, remembering all the late-night rides she'd never understood as a child, the whispered conversations between her parents, the training with old Jack that had seemed like just a special game. She knew someday someone would need to finish what she started. A commotion at the door draws their attention. Old Jack Wallace himself strides in, looking as if he'd ridden through hell to get there. His clothes are trail-worn, and his silver hair is wild, but his eyes are sharp as ever. "Came as soon as I heard the shooting start," he says gruffly, looking around the room. His gaze softens when it lands on William. "How is he?" "He'll recover," Clara assures him, accepting the brief, rough hug he offers. "Thanks to you. If you hadn't trained me..." Old Jack waves off her gratitude. "Your mother made me promise to look after you both. Sarah Blackwood never asked for anything she hadn't earned twice over." He produces a worn leather journal from his saddlebag. "Found this out at my cabin. Reckon it belongs to you now." Clara takes the journal, recognizing her mother's handwriting inside. There are not just the coded maps that had kept Hawthorne chasing shadows, but her mother's own story, the tale of a woman who'd chosen justice over wealth, love over power, and had prepared her daughter to finish the fight she'd known might someday come. "Miss Blackwood," one of the federal agents calls from the doorway, "we need your statement about what happened here." "Go on," Dr. Anderson encourages. "Your father's stable now. Macpherson and I will stay with him." As Clara follows the agent out, she pauses in Hawthorne's ruined trophy room. Sunlight streams through the broken windows, catching the silver shooting cup she'd used to end his reign of terror. On an impulse, she picks it up, reading the inscription, "First place, Helena Marksmanship Competition, 1865. "Your mother won that," old Jack says quietly, having followed her. "Hawthorne stole it the night she disappeared from Helena. Seemed fitting you should use it to bring him down." "What happens now?" Clara asks, looking around at the mansion that had loomed over Thunder Valley for so long. Old Jack's weathered face breaks into a rare smile. "Now you help your father heal, help the town rebuild. Maybe teach a few others what I taught you. There's always a need for folks who can stand up to men like Hawthorne." Through the window, Clara can see the townspeople already at work, clearing debris and helping the wounded. Catherine Harrison is organizing care for those who'd been hurt, while Cooper and Marshal Harrison coordinate with the federal marshals. The morning sun catches her grandfather's compass, still hanging around her neck, reminding her of all that had been sacrificed to reach this moment. "The rifle suited you well," old Jack observes. "Reckon you'll be keeping it? Clara touches her mother's Winchester, feeling its familiar weight. "Reckon I will," she says softly. "Someone needs to make sure justice rides these trails." 3 months after the fall of Richard Hawthorne, Thunder Valley looks like a different town. The summer sun beats down on newly repaired buildings, fresh paint, and bustling streets. Where once people hurried about their business in fearful silence, now there's laughter and open conversation. Children play freely in the streets, no longer afraid of Hawthorne's men riding through. Clara Blackwood stands on the boardwalk outside the newly established Thunder Valley Bank, watching as Mr. Patterson, the former bank manager, directs workers hanging a sign announcing the return of people's savings. Thanks to careful accounting and the seized assets from Hawthorne's estate, every penny stolen has been returned to its rightful owners. "Quite a change, isn't it?" Catherine Harrison says, joining her friend. She's wearing a deputy's badge now, having proved her worth during the fight at the mansion. "Father's coming back today from the territorial capital. Says the governor himself wants to thank everyone who helped bring down Hawthorne's network." The mention of the network brings a smile to Clara's face. The evidence her mother gathered, combined with Cooper's testimony, had led to arrests across 3 territories. Corrupt judges, bought lawmen, and crooked politicians had fallen like dominoes, leaving room for honest folk to step up. "How's your father doing?" Catherine asks as they walk toward McPherson's saloon, which has become something of an unofficial. "At town hall these days. Better every day," Clara replies. The bullet wound had been serious, but William Blackwood was too stubborn to let it keep him down. He's even talking about expanding the ranch, now that the water rights have been properly sorted out. Inside the saloon, McPherson is hosting a meeting of the town council, another change from Hawthorne's days. The people of Thunder Valley now have a say in their own governance, with representatives from every part of town having a voice. "Clara!" McPherson calls out, waving them over. "Just the person we needed to see. We've been discussing the new marshal's office." Since James Harrison's promotion to Territorial Marshal, Thunder Valley has been in need of a new peace officer. Michael Cooper had been offered the job, but he declined, preferring to continue his work with the federal marshals, tracking down the last of Hawthorne's associates. "The town council's been talking," McPherson continues, his green eyes twinkling. "We need someone who knows right from wrong. Someone who can handle themselves in a fight but prefers to solve problems peacefully. Someone who's already proved they care about this town and its people." Clara looks around the room, seeing nothing but supportive faces. Even Reverend Walsh, who'd once preached against women taking men's roles, nods encouragingly. "You want me to be a marshal?" Clara asks, her hand unconsciously touching her mother's Winchester. "Can't think of anyone better suited," comes a gruff voice from the doorway. Old Jack Wallace steps into the saloon, looking more respectable than usual in a clean coat. "Your mother would be proud." The mention of Sarah Blackwood brings a hush to the room. Since Hawthorne's fall, more stories about her have come to light. Tales of a woman who'd spent years building a case against corruption while raising a daughter and protecting a town that never knew how much it owed her. "Speaking of your mother," Old Jack continues, producing a package wrapped in oilcloth, "found this in my cabin. Been saving it for the right moment." He unwraps the package to reveal a Silver Marshal star badge, slightly tarnished but still proud. "She wore this in Helena before she chose a quieter life. Reckon it's yours now if you want it." Clara takes the badge, feeling its weight, both physical and symbolic. "What about the people who won't accept a woman as marshal?" "Then they can leave," McPherson says firmly. "This ain't Hawthorne's Thunder Valley anymore. We make our own rules now." Catherine touches her own deputy's badge. "Besides, anyone who saw you handle Hawthorne and his men knows better than to question your abilities." The door opens again, admitting William Blackwood, walking with a cane but standing straight and proud. "Thought I'd find you here," he says, to Clara. Got something to show you up at the ranch. Curious, Clara follows her father out. They ride together to the Blackwood Ranch, where the summer wheat waves golden in the breeze. William leads her to the old cottonwood tree, the one where she'd learned to shoot, where her mother's secrets had been buried. Your mother didn't. Just leave us evidence against Hawthorne, William says, pulling out a folded paper from his vest. She left us a dream. He hands Clara the document, plans for a shooting academy designed to train law officers and ordinary citizens alike in the responsible use of firearms. She believed that the best way to fight corruption was to make sure good people could defend themselves, William explains. The town council's already approved the land grant. Old Jack's agreed to help with the training. Clara looks at the plans, then at the badge in her hand. A lot of responsibility, she muses. You can handle it, William assures her. You're your mother's daughter, after all. Back in town, more changes are underway. The Anderson family has reopened their store, now twice as large as before. The old mission has been converted into a school where Catherine teaches self-defense alongside regular lessons. Cooper's occasional visits bring news of justice being served across the territory, while Marshal Harrison, now Territorial Marshal Harrison, ensures that no one like Hawthorne can ever again build an empire on corruption and fear. Clara pins her mother's badge to her vest, feeling its familiar weight settle over her heart. Through the saloon window, she can see the townspeople going about their business, free from fear at last. A young girl watches her with undisguised admiration, perhaps seeing in Clara what Clara once saw in her own mother, proof that one person's courage can change everything. Well, she says, adjusting her mother's Winchester, reckon Thunder Valley could use a marshal who knows the difference between justice and the law. 6 months into Clara Blackwood's tenure as Marshal of Thunder Valley, autumn paints the surrounding hills in gold and crimson. The morning finds her making her rounds, her mother's Winchester at her side and Sarah's badge gleaming on her vest. The town has settled into a new rhythm, with Clara's daily patrols becoming as natural as sunrise. The streets that once echoed with the heavy boots of Hawthorne's thugs now ring with the sounds of honest commerce and children's laughter. The Shooting Academy has graduated its first class, sending trained peacekeepers throughout the territory. Each student learns not just marksmanship, but the principles Sarah Blackwood lived by, that true strength lies not in the weapon you carry, but in how you choose to use it. Clara pauses at the cottonwood tree where it all began, where a small memorial now stands. Sarah Golden Eye Blackwood. The inscription reads, who taught us that one person's courage can light the way for many. Beside it, a wall bears the names of others who gave their lives fighting corruption, ensuring their sacrifices would not be forgotten. The morning sun catches the brass compass at her throat as Clara continues her rounds. The future stretches before her like the open prairie, full of challenges and possibilities. But she's ready for them now, carrying not just her mother's Winchester, but her legacy, a legacy of justice, courage, and the unwavering belief that good people standing together can overcome any evil. Thunder Valley has found its protector, and the legend of Sarah Blackwood lives on through her daughter, who proved that sometimes the most dangerous thing on the frontier isn't the fastest gun or the richest man. It's a woman with the courage to stand up for what's right. Winter comes early to Thunder Valley, painting the town in pristine white as the first heavy snow blankets the Montana Territory. A year has passed since Clara Blackwood first took up her mother's Winchester, and the town has flourished in ways few could have imagined. But peace, as Clara's mother always said, is something you have to guard as carefully as a loaded rifle. No. Morning air carries the sharp bite of approaching winter, mixing with the smell of wood smoke from newly kindled fires. Clara stands on the porch of the marshal's office, watching as workers mount a fresh sign on the building across the street. Blackwood School of Marksmanship and Frontier Justice. The academy her mother dreamed of has become reality, with Old Jack Wallace serving as head instructor and students coming from 3 territories to learn. "Rider coming in," Catherine Harrison calls out, emerging from the office. Her deputy's badge catches the winter sun as she points toward the northern road. Through the swirling snow, Clara spots a lone horseman pushing hard toward town, his mount leaving deep tracks in the fresh powder. The rider proves to be young Tommy Anderson, his face red from the cold as he reins up before them. "Marshal Blackwood," he calls out, breath steaming in the frigid air. "Wire from Pine Ridge. They're saying Thorne's brother is gathering men, the ones who escaped after Hawthorne fell. They've already hit 2 banks up north." Clara's hand moves instinctively to her mother's Winchester. Marcus Thorne had never mentioned a brother, but there'd been rumors of Lucas Thorne, a man who'd made his reputation running guns to hostile tribes and outlaws across the territory. "Any casualties?" Tommy nods grimly. 3 dead in the last raid. They're not just stealing money, they're burning records, destroying evidence that could link them to Hawthorne's old operations. "Get word to Cooper," Clara tells Catherine. "He'll want to know they're active again, and send someone for Old Jack. If Lucas Thorne's anything like his brother, we'll need to be ready." Inside the marshal's office, Clara finds her father studying. A map spread across her desk. William Blackwood's recovery has been slow but steady, and though he still walks with a slight limp, his mind is as sharp as ever. "Trouble?" he asks, noting her expression. "Could be," Clara replies, marking the locations of the recent raids with red pins. "Lucas Thorne's gathering what's left of Hawthorne's men. Looks like they're working their way south." William traces a line between the marked towns, his weathered finger coming to rest on Thunder Valley. "They'll come here. Too much unfinished business. Too many scores they think need settling." "Let them come." Old Jack's voice cuts through the room as the veteran shooter enters, shaking snow from his coat. "Valley's different now. Whole town's trained and ready, thanks to the academy. Besides," he adds with a grim smile, "been wanting to meet the other Thorne brother for a while now." The door opens again, admitting McPherson and Reverend Walsh. Both men's faces serious. "Just got word from my cousin up in Helena," McPherson reports. "Lucas Thorne's been recruiting, not just outlaws, but former lawmen who lost their positions when Hawthorne's empire fell. Men with badges who still think they're owed something. And they have support," Walsh adds, pulling a newspaper from his coat. "Some of the big ranchers who benefited from Hawthorne's schemes are backing them. They're calling it a restoration of proper order." Clara studies the paper, her jaw tightening as she reads. The article paints Thunder Valley's transformation as a breakdown of civilization, claiming that allowing women to serve as peace officers and common folk to have a say in governance goes against natural law. "They're not just coming for revenge," she realizes. "They want to make an example of us." "Then we'll make an example of them instead," Catherine declares, her voice carrying the same steel that had served her well during the mansion fight. "Show everyone in the territory that the old ways are done." The next few days pass in a flurry of preparation. Clara coordinates with Cooper and the federal marshals, establishing a network of riders to bring warning when Thorne's gang moves. The academy's students, many of them now serving as deputies in surrounding towns, pledge their support. William Blackwood opens the ranch as a fallback position, while McPherson converts his cellar into an arsenal. But it's the town itself that shows the most remarkable transformation. Where once people would have fled at the first sign of trouble, now they stand ready. The Anderson family fortifies their store, while the bank, still bearing the scars of the last fight, becomes a virtual fortress. Even the school children do their part, running messages and helping to stockpile supplies. A week into their preparations, as the winter wind howls through Thunder Valley's streets, Clara finds herself back at the cottonwood tree, standing before her mother's memorial. Fresh snow dusts the inscription, but Sarah Blackwood's words remain clear. One person's courage can light the way for many. She'd be proud, you know, old Jack says, appearing beside her like a ghost in the swirling snow. Not just of you, but of what this town's become. Sarah always said the measure of leadership isn't in how many fights you win, but in how many people stand with you when the fighting starts. Clara brushes snow from the brass compass at her throat, remembering all the lessons hidden in her mother's journal. Think we're ready? Ready as we'll ever be, old Jack replies, his breath frosting in the cold air. Got 72 trained shooters in town now, counting the academy's current class. Every approach covered, every line of sight mapped. Plus, he adds with a hint of pride, taught some of your students that long-distance night shooting trick your mother used in the Helena incident. Their conversation is interrupted by the distant sound of hoofbeats, a rider approaching hard from the north. Clara's hand moves to her Winchester, but she relaxes slightly as she recognizes Michael Cooper's distinctive silhouette emerging from the snow. They're coming, he announces without preamble, swinging down from his horse. Lucas Thorne's got 30 men, maybe more. Hit the Wilkins Ranch yesterday looking for fresh mounts. They're not bothering to hide their trail anymore. How long? Clara asks, already calculating distances and options. 2 days, maybe 3 if this weather holds. Cooper's eyes scan the horizon, where dark clouds promise more snow. They're not just bandits, Clara. Most of them wore badges once, carrying the law in their hands until Hawthorne's fall took it away. Makes them more dangerous than common outlaws. They still think they're right. Then we'll show them just how wrong they are, Clara says firmly. Get some rest, Michael. Tomorrow we start setting our traps. As Cooper heads for McPherson's, where a warm bed awaits, Clara remains by the memorial, lost in thought. The wind carries memories of her mother's voice, lessons taught beneath this very tree. Remember, Clara, it's not about being the fastest or the most accurate. It's about being smarter, about knowing when to fight and when to let your enemy's own mistakes do the fighting for you. The next 2 days transform Thunder Valley into a carefully orchestrated battlefield. Every intersection becomes a potential crossfire point, every alley a chance for ambush. The Academy's students apply their training in new ways, setting up elevated positions and emergency fallback points. William Blackwood, drawing on his own frontier experience, helps design defensive positions that take advantage of the winter conditions. Clara walks the town each evening, checking preparations and bolstering spirits. She finds Catherine Harrison, drilling a group of townswomen in rapid reload techniques, while Reverend Walsh turns his church basement into an emergency hospital. McPherson's saloon becomes their command center, its back room filled with maps and contingency plans. On the morning of the 3rd day, as fresh snow begins to fall, the lookout in the church steeple spots movement to the north. Through his spyglass, he counts at least 40 riders approaching slowly, their black shapes stark against the white landscape. At their head rides a man whose resemblance to Marcus Thorne is unmistakable. The same cold eyes, the same predatory grace, but with an added edge of calculated brutality. Clara climbs the steeple herself, studying the approaching force through her own glass. Lucas Thorne has positioned his men carefully, with outriders watching the flanks and advanced scouts probing for ambush points. These aren't just revenge-seeking bandits, they're trained lawmen turned outlaw, bringing years of experience to their attack. They're better organized than I expected, old Jack observes from beside her. Got proper military formation, probably some former cavalry among them. Won't be able to surprise them easily. Then we won't try to surprise them at all, Clara replies, a plan forming in her mind. Mother always said the best trap is the one your enemy thinks he's too smart to fall for. Send word to Cooper, Tell him to put the second part of our plan into action and get me that white flag from the church storage. Think it's time I had a word with Lucas Thorne. The winter wind whips Clara's coat as she rides out to meet the approaching force, the white flag of parley snapping above her head. Shadow's hooves crunch in the fresh snow, leaving deep tracks. In the pristine white, behind her Thunder Valley waits in tense silence, every window and rooftop concealing a trained marksman, every street and alley a potential battleground. Lucas Thorne rides out to meet her, flanked by two men Clara recognizes. Former deputies from Helena who'd lost their positions when Hawthorne's corruption was exposed. Thorne sits his horse with military precision, his black duster and wide-brimmed hat dusted with snow. Unlike his brother's snake-like charm, Lucas carries himself with cold, professional detachment. They meet in the middle ground between the two forces, their horses' breath steaming in the frigid air. Up close, Clara can see the family resemblance to Marcus more clearly, the same sharp features, but hardened by years of frontier warfare rather than salon gambling. Marshal Blackwood, Thorne says, his voice carrying the cultured accent of an educated man. I've heard a great deal about you. The woman who brought down Richard Hawthorne's empire with a rifle and her mother's legend. His eyes flick to the Winchester at her saddle. I trust you know why we're here. To die in the snow? Clara suggests calmly. Because that's what'll happen if you bring your fight into my town. A thin smile crosses Thorne's face. Your town. This territory was civilized by men like Richard Hawthorne, built on proper order and respect for natural hierarchy. Now look at it. Women wearing badges, common ranch hands sitting on town councils, former outlaws like Cooper pretending to be lawmen. Civilized. Clara's voice carries across the snow-covered ground. Is that what you call burning out families? Stealing people's life savings? Murdering doctors who knew too much about convenient fevers? Progress requires sacrifice, Thorne replies smoothly. The weak must give way to the strong. It's nature's law, but I'm not unreasonable. He reaches into his coat, producing a folded document. I have here a territorial judge's order declaring your appointment as marshal illegal and reinstating proper authority. Surrender your badge, hand over your mother's evidence files, and I'll ensure your people are treated fairly under the new administration. Clara studies him for a moment, seeing in his eyes the same fanatical certainty she'd seen in Hawthorne's. And if I refuse, then we'll burn Thunder Valley to the ground and build something better from its ashes. His smile never wavers. You have 1 hour to consider my offer. I suggest you use it wisely. As Clara turns Shadow back toward town, Thorne calls after her. One more thing, Marshal. I knew your mother back in Helena. She made the same choice you're facing now. Look where it got her. Clara reins up, fixing him with a steady gaze. Yes, look where it got her. A daughter who finished what she started. A town that remembers her as a hero, and men like you still running scared of her ghost. Without waiting for his response, she spurs Shadow toward Thunder Valley. Back in McPherson's command center, Clara finds the town's leaders waiting for her assessment. Well, old Jack asks, cleaning his rifle with methodical care. 43 men that I could count, Clara reports. All well-armed, many with military or law enforcement experience. They've got the new Winchester repeaters, probably supplied by those ranchers backing their restoration. She spreads out the town map, marking positions. Thorne's smart, professional, won't fall for obvious traps or rush in blindly like his brother did. But that professional pride's a weakness too, Cooper observes from his corner. Men like that, they have patterns, procedures, make them predictable if you know what to look for. William Blackwood traces the town's outskirts on the map. They'll try to surround us first, cut off any escape routes. Standard cavalry tactic against a defended position. Let them, Clara says, a plan crystallizing in her mind. Mother's journal mentioned something about the Helena incident, about using an enemy's training against him. Old Jack, remember that. Trickshot drill you taught the advanced students last week? The old marksman's eyes light up with understanding. The one your mother used in the silver mine ambush? Risky in this weather, but if it works... Catherine, Clara turns to her deputy, get word to the rooftop teams. Tell them to light the signal fires as soon as they see Thorne's men moving into position, and make sure everyone knows their fallback points. What about the townspeople? Reverend Walsh asks. The ones who can't fight. The old mining tunnels, William suggests, the ones Sarah mapped years ago. They lead all the way to the ranch if needed. Clara nods, remembering the careful drawings in her mother's journal. McPherson, you, and Walsh coordinate the evacuation. Anyone who can't or won't fight needs to be underground before Thorne makes his move. Cooper, get your best riders ready. If things go wrong, someone has to get word to the federal marshal. As the others move to their tasks, Clara finds herself alone with her father. William studies his daughter, seeing in her face the same determination that had drawn him to Sarah all those years ago. Your mother faced a choice like this once, he says quietly, in Helena, when Hawthorne's men first showed their true colors. What did she choose? She chose to fight smart instead of fighting angry, knew she couldn't save everyone or change everything at once. But she could light the way, show people they had a choice. He puts a hand on Clara's shoulder. Sometimes, the bravest thing isn't standing your ground, it's knowing the right ground to stand on. Clara touches the brass compass at her throat, then her mother's badge, drawing strength from both. Outside, the winter wind howls through Thunder Valley's streets, carrying the promise of steel and gun smoke. But underneath its bitter song, she hears something else. The steady heartbeat of a town united, the quiet courage of people who've learned to stand together. Get everyone in position, she tells her father. It's time to show Lucas Thorne what Thunder Valley's really made of. That hour passes like a held breath. Snow continues to fall as Thunder Valley waits, every defender in position, every trap set. Clara stands in the church steeple, watching through her spyglass as Lucas Thorne's men move into their surrounding positions, just as her father predicted. Their black forms cut through the white landscape like ink stains on paper. Signal fires are ready, Catherine reports, climbing up beside her. Everyone's in position. Old Jack's got his best students on the roof of the bank, and Cooper's riders are standing by. Clara nods, noting how Thorne's men split into smaller groups, taking up tactical positions around the town's perimeter. Professional, she murmurs, using proper military formation. See how they're establishing clear lines of fire. They're expecting a straight fight. Then let's give them something else entirely, Catherine says with a grim smile. The first shot comes exactly as the hour expires, a single rifle crack that splits the winter air. One of Thorne's men tumbles from his saddle, taken down by Old Jack's precise aim from the bank roof. The battle for Thunder Valley begins. Thorne's response is immediate and coordinated. His men advance in waves, using buildings and wagons for cover as they push into town from multiple directions. But Thunder Valley has been preparing for this moment. Each street becomes a killing ground, each alley a potential ambush point. Clara's voice rings out clear and steady. Light the fires. Signal fires bloom on rooftops across town, their smoke mixing with the falling snow. To Thorne's men, they must look like random defensive signals. But Clara knows better. Each fire's position marks a specific target zone, carefully planned and measured. First phase, she commands. Just like we practiced. The Academy's students, positioned in upper windows and on rooftops, begin their carefully coordinated crossfire. They don't aim to kill, not yet. Instead, they force Thorne's men to bunch up, to seek cover exactly where Clara wants them. They're clustering near the bank, Catherine observes, just like you said they would. Military training, Clara explains, switching positions to get a better view. They'll try to secure the most defensible building first. Time for the second phase. A whistle cuts through the gunfire, 3 sharp blasts. Suddenly, the defenders seem to waver, some positions falling silent. To Thorne's experienced eye, it must look like amateur fighters losing their nerve. "They're taking the bait," Catherine says tensely, "moving up fast now." Clara watches as Thorne's men advance more boldly, believing they've found a weakness in the town's defense. They're good, professional and disciplined, but they're fighting the last war, using tactics that worked against untrained townspeople. They don't realize every street and building has been carefully prepared over the past 2 days. Now, Clara's command carries across the winter air. Hidden defenders emerge from concealed positions, behind and beside Thorne's advancing forces. The carefully scattered wagon wheels and barrels that seemed like random debris become perfect shooting positions. Every calculation old Jack drilled into his students comes into play. Distance, wind, elevation. The trap closes like a steel jaw. Thorne's men find themselves caught in a deadly crossfire, their own training working against them as they bunch together in textbook defensive formations that only make them easier targets. Push them toward the livery, Clara orders, already moving to her next position. The livery stable, its front seemingly fortified, looks like a natural fallback point for Thorne's men. What they don't know is that its back wall has been subtly weakened, ready to collapse and create even more chaos. But Lucas Thorne didn't earn his reputation by being predictable. A new sound cuts through the gunfire, the sharp crack of lightning, followed by the boom of thunder. The winter storm is intensifying, and with it Thorne changes tactics. "Clara," Cooper's voice carries from below. "They're using the storm for cover, pushing hard on the east side." Through the swirling snow, Clara spots them. A larger force than expected, led by Thorne himself, attacking with desperate fury. They're not just trying to take the town anymore, they're aiming to burn it down. Several buildings are already ablaze, the fires casting eerie shadows through the snow. They're going to trap themselves, Catherine realizes. In this weather, with the snow and the smoke, that's exactly what Thorne wants. Clara cuts in, understanding dawning. He's creating confusion, making it impossible to maintain coordinated defense. "Catherine, get word to old Jack. Tell him to fall back to second position. And find my father. Make sure he's ready with the water brigade." The battle descends into chaos as visibility drops to nearly nothing. The mix of smoke, snow, and approaching darkness turns Thunder Valley into a nightmare landscape of shadows and sudden violence. Gunfire seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Clara moves through it all like a ghost, just as old Jack taught her. Her mother's Winchester speaks with deadly precision whenever a target presents itself. She doesn't aim to kill when she can help it. Sarah Blackwood's daughter understands that dead men can't face justice, but she makes sure every shot counts. A crash from the direction of the bank draws her attention. Through the storm, she sees Lucas Thorne himself leading a charge toward the building, probably assuming it holds the town's wealth and documents. His men use oil lanterns as improvised bombs, trying to smoke out the defenders. "Time for the third phase," Clara mutters, then raises her voice to be heard over the storm. "Fall back! Everyone fall back to the bank!" The defenders retreat in seemingly panicked disarray, leaving Thorne's men to believe they've finally broken the town's resistance. As they push forward, more buildings catch fire, their flames hissing in the falling snow. Out of the smoke and shadow looms the bank, its stone facade still sturdy despite the scars from previous battles. Thorne's men converge on it, exactly as planned. Clara watches from her hidden position as Lucas Thorne himself approaches the front steps. Victory, already showing in his stance. "Just like Helena, isn't it?" he calls out, his voice carrying over the storm. "Your mother tried to make a stand there too." thought she could change the natural order of things. All she did was die trying. "My mother knew something you never learned, Lucas," Clara responds, her voice seemingly coming from everywhere at once. Another trick old Jack had taught her. She knew the difference between order and justice. Thorne's men cluster tighter around the bank, searching for the source of her voice. The snow and smoke make it impossible to pin down her location, just as she'd planned. "Justice?" Thorne laughs, but there's an edge of uncertainty in it now. Justice is what the strong decide it is. Always has been, always will be. "Wrong again," Clara says. "Justice is what happens when good people stand together. Now, old Jack." The bank's front doors burst open, but instead of defenders rushing out, something else emerges. Water. Hundreds of gallons of it, pumped up from the wells over the past 2 days, now released in a torrent. In the freezing temperature, it turns to ice almost instantly, creating a treacherous surface that sends Thorne's men sprawling. At the same moment, hidden hatches in the bank's roof open, revealing Clara's best marksmen. Their rifles speak as picking off weapons and gun hands with surgical precision. The combination of ice, concentrated fire, and surprise shatters Thorne's formation completely. Clara steps out of the smoke like an avenging spirit, her mother's Winchester held. "Ready." "Surrender, Lucas," she calls out. "Your men are trapped, your position is hopeless, and reinforcements are already riding from the territorial capital. Don't make this any bloodier than it has to be." But Lucas Thorne didn't come this far to surrender. With a roar of rage, he brings up his rifle, aiming not at Clara but at the bank's upper windows, where Catherine and several other defenders are exposed. What happens next seems to unfold in slow motion. Clara's Winchester comes up smoothly, just as she'd practiced thousands of times beneath the old cottonwood tree. The distance is long, the conditions terrible, but Sarah Blackwood's daughter doesn't hesitate. 2 shots ring out almost as one. Thorne's bullet smashes harmlessly into the bank's stone wall. Clara strikes his rifle's action, destroying the weapon and sending him staggering backward onto the ice. "That was for Helena," Clara says quietly, keeping her Winchester trained on him as he struggles to rise. "And this is for Thunder Valley." The second shot takes him in the shoulder, spinning him completely around before he crashes to the frozen ground. Around him, seeing their leader fall, the remaining fight goes. Out of Thorne's men, weapons clatter to the ice as hands raise in surrender. The sudden silence feels louder than the gunfire that preceded it. Snow continues to fall, already beginning to cover the scars of battle. Through the swirling white, Cooper and his deputies emerge to take charge of the prisoners, while William Blackwood leads the water brigade to tackle the remaining fires. Clara keeps her Winchester ready as she approaches the fallen Thorne. He lies on the ice, clutching his wounded shoulder, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. "You don't understand what you've done," he gasps. "The territory needs men like me, like Hawthorne. Without us, there's only chaos." "No," Clara replies, kicking his backup revolver away. "Without men like you, there's justice. Something my mother understood, and you never will." She turns to Cooper. "Get him and his men locked up, and send riders to the territorial marshal. Tell him we've got some trash that needs collecting." As the prisoners are led away, the full scope of the battle becomes clear. Several buildings along Main Street bear scorch marks or bullet holes, but the town itself stands intact. More importantly, the defensive strategy had worked. Casualties among the defenders are light, mostly minor wounds that Dr. Anderson is already treating in the church basement. "Could have gone much worse," old Jack observes, joining Clara as she surveys the damage. His rifle stock shows fresh marks, and powder burns darken his sleeve. "Your mother would have appreciated the plan, using their own training against them, making them bunch up where we wanted them. Clever girl." Clara begins to respond, but movement from the bank's doorway catches her attention. Catherine emerges, supporting a limping Macpherson. The saloon-keeper's arm is bandaged, but his eyes are bright with triumph. "You should have seen it, Marshal," he calls out, when Thorne's men tried to rush the back door, thinking they'd found a weak spot. "Your father was waiting with that old shotgun of his, and the Anderson boys—" He breaks off, wincing as Catherine helps him sit. "Well, let's just say those outlaws learned some manners real quick." More townspeople emerge from their defensive positions, checking on neighbors and assessing damage. The Reverend Walsh leads a group carrying water and medical supplies, while the Anderson family begins distributing hot coffee and bread to the cold, tired defenders. 3 of Thorne's men are dead, Cooper reports, returning from his rounds. Another 7 wounded, badly enough to need the doctor. Most of the rest are former lawmen, just like we figured. Found territory badges on several of them. Stolen or bought, probably. Clara nods, then turns as a shout comes from the church steeple. "Riders coming! From the south!" Everyone tenses, hands moving to weapons. But Clara recognizes the lead riders, silhouette even through the snow. "It's all right," she calls out. "That's Territorial Marshal Harrison." James Harrison leads a column of 20 mounted lawmen into Thunder Valley, their horses' hooves crunching on the fresh snow and ice. He reins up before Clara, taking in the scene with experienced eyes. The prisoners being led to the jail. The smoldering buildings, the tired but proud defenders. "Looks like we missed the excitement," he says, swinging down from his saddle. "Got word from one of Cooper's riders about Thorne's attack. Rode all night to get here, but I see you had things." "Well in hand. The town handled itself," Clara replies simply. Harrison surveys the scene again, noting the precise positioning of defenders, the clever use of terrain and weather. "This wasn't just a victory," he says thoughtfully. "This was a message to every would-be tyrant in the territory who thinks they can rule through fear and hired guns. The only message that matters," Clara says, "is that people don't have to live in fear, that they can stand together and win." As if to punctuate her words, the storm begins to ease. Sunlight breaks through the clouds, catching the brass compass at Clara's throat and the silver star on her chest. Around them, Thunder Valley begins to stir back to life. Children peek out from cellar doors where they'd sheltered during the fight. Women emerge from the mining tunnels, carrying supplies and helping the wounded. "You know what this means, don't you?" Harrison asks, watching as his men help secure the prisoners. "Every corrupt judge, every crooked politician who supported men like Thorne and Hawthorne, they'll see this as a challenge. They'll try to stop what's happening here, try to prevent it from spreading." "Let them try," old Jack growls. "Way I see it, Thunder Valley just graduated its biggest class yet. Every person who stood their ground today learned something about courage, about standing together. That kind of learning, it spreads." Clara walks to where her father stands near the bank steps. William Blackwood's clothes are soaked from fighting. Fires, and his limp is more pronounced from the cold, but his eyes shine with pride. "Your mother once told me," he says softly, "that the most important battles aren't won with guns. They win in people's hearts, when they finally realize they don't have to accept injustice as natural law." Looking around at her town, at Catherine, organizing care for the wounded, at Cooper teaching young Tommy Anderson how to properly secure prisoners, at old Jack already planning improvements to the academy's training based on lessons learned today, Clara understands what her mother meant. The sun breaks fully through the clouds now, making the snow-covered street glitter like diamonds. The brass compass warms against Clara's throat as she helps her father toward the doctor's office to have his leg checked. Behind them, the townspeople begin the work of cleaning up, rebuilding, moving forward. "Marshal Blackwood," Tommy Anderson calls out, running up with an urgent expression. "A wire just came in from Pine Ridge. They're asking if you'll send someone to help them set up their own academy. Says they're tired of waiting for others to protect them." Clara exchanges glances with old Jack, seeing in his weathered face the same satisfaction she feels. "Tell them we'll do better than that," she says. Tell them Thunder Valley will show them how to protect themselves. The winter sun climbs higher over the mountains as Clara makes her rounds, checking on the wounded, ensuring the prisoners are secure, helping where she can. Her mother's Winchester rests comfortably across her back, its weight familiar and right. Sarah Blackwood's legacy, she realizes, isn't just in the gun she carried or the badge she wore. It's in the courage she inspired, the changes she started, the hope she planted like seeds in frozen ground. Today, in Thunder Valley, those seeds had flowered into something beautiful and strong, something that would spread across the territory like spring after a hard winter. Justice, it turns out, rides with those brave enough to stand together. And in Thunder Valley, that lesson would never be forgotten. Spring returns to Thunder Valley, painting the Montana hills in wildflowers and promise. 3 months have passed since Lucas Thorne's defeat, and the town has flourished in ways that continue to surprise even its staunchest defenders. The Blackwood School of Marksmanship and Frontier Justice has graduated 3 more classes, sending trained peacekeepers throughout the territory. Clara stands beneath the old cottonwood tree on the Blackwood Ranch, where a new memorial garden blooms around her mother's headstone. The morning sun warms the brass compass at her throat as she reads the fresh inscription, Sarah, Golden Eye Blackwood. Her courage lit the way for many, and her light still shines. Thought I'd find you. Here, Catherine says, approaching on horseback. Her deputy's badge catches the spring light. Wire just came in from Pine Ridge. Their new academy graduated its first class yesterday. 15 new peacekeepers, including 3 women. Clara smiles, remembering how Thunder Valley's example had sparked similar changes across the territory. After Thorne's defeat, other towns had begun standing up to corruption and intimidation. The old power structures, built on fear and bought justice, were crumbling like winter ice in spring floods. How many academies now? She asks, though she already knows the answer. 7, Catherine replies proudly, and more requesting help every week. Marshal Harrison says the territorial governor's talking about making it official, establishing a proper network of training centers based on what we started here. Their conversation is interrupted by the sound of approaching wagons. Through the morning haze, Clara spots a familiar figure driving the lead team. William Blackwood sits straight and tall in the seat, his limp barely noticeable now. Behind him, a line of wagons carries supplies and equipment for the Academy's latest expansion. Everyone said it couldn't be done, William calls out as he pulls up. A proper shooting range, with covered firing positions for winter training. But those new students from up north insisted on contributing. Said if Thunder Valley could stand against Thorne in the snow, they needed to learn to shoot in all weather. Clara helps her father down from the wagon, noting how the past months have seemed to rejuvenate him. The weight of years spent living under Hawthorne's shadow has lifted, replaced by the pride of seeing his wife's dreams taking root and flourishing. Got visitors coming, he adds, nodding toward the road to town. Cooper's back from his federal marshal duties, and he's brought some interesting news from the capital. Michael Cooper rides up a few minutes later, looking more official in his federal marshal's coat, but still carrying himself with the same quiet competence. Behind him rides old Jack, his rifle still ever present, but now more often used for teaching than fighting. Lucas Thorne's trial finished yesterday, Cooper announces without preamble. Him and 23 of his men, all convicted. The evidence your mother gathered combined with their attacks on those banks. They'll never see freedom again. But that's not the interesting part, old Jack adds, swinging down from his horse with familiar grace. Tell her the rest, Michael. Cooper's usually serious face breaks into a rare smile. The territorial governor was impressed by how Thunder Valley handled itself. Not just the fighting, but what came after, the academy, the way you've helped. Other towns stand up for themselves. He's creating a new position, Territorial Director of Peace Officer Training. Clara raises an eyebrow. Let me guess. They want someone who's proven they can teach more than just shooting. They want someone who understands that true justice comes from community strength, not just badge authority, Cooper confirms. Someone who learned those lessons from Sarah Blackwood and has proven they work. Before Clara can respond, more riders appear on the road from town. McPherson leads a group of academy students, their proud bearing marking them as near graduation. Among them rides Tommy Anderson, no longer the wide-eyed boy who'd brought news of Thorne's approach, but a confident young man ready to carry Thunder Valley's lessons to his own community. "Final examinations today," McPherson announces, his old wound barely slowing him down. "Thought you might want to see what old Jack's been teaching them about your mother's special tricks." The group makes its way to the academy's ranges, where more students and townspeople gather to watch the graduation trials. Clara notes with pride how many wear badges now, not just academy graduates, but regular citizens who've learned to take responsibility for their community's safety. Reverend Walsh stands with a group of visiting lawmen from neighboring territories, explaining Thunder Valley's philosophy of community defense. "It's not about having the fastest draw or the deadliest aim," he tells them. "It's about teaching people they don't have to live in fear, that together they're stronger than any outlaw or corrupt official." The examination begins, showcasing not just shooting skill, but judgment, tactical thinking, and most importantly, the ability to de-escalate situations without violence. Clara watches as Tommy Anderson talks down a mock confrontation, using words and presence instead of threats and force. "Your mother would have loved this," William says softly, standing beside her. "She always said the true measure of strength isn't in how many fights you win, but in how many you prevent." As the sun climbs higher, Clara makes her way to the front of the gathered crowd. The brass compass warms against her skin as she addresses the graduating class. "When my mother first started teaching me to shoot beneath that old cottonwood tree, she told me something I didn't understand until recently. She said that a gun is just a tool, like a plow or a hammer. What matters is the heart and mind of the person wielding it." She looks out at the faces before her, young and old, men and women from all walks of life. Each carries their own story of standing up to injustice, of choosing to be part of something larger than themselves. 3 months ago, Thunder Valley proved that ordinary people standing together can overcome any threat. But the real victory wasn't in the bullets we fired or the battle we won. It was in showing others that they don't have to accept corruption and fear as natural law. A murmur of agreement ripples through the crowd. Clara continues, her voice carrying clear and strong. "Each of you will leave here, carrying more than just the skills we've taught. You carry the responsibility to light the way for others, just as my mother did for me. Remember that the badge you wear and the gun you carry are symbols of trust, not power. Your true strength lies in the communities you serve and protect." The ceremony continues as each graduate receives their certification. Clara notes with pride how many are headed to towns that once lived under the shadow of men like Hawthorne and Thorne. The seeds of change, planted in blood and courage, are sprouting across the territory. Later, as the celebration winds down, Clara finds herself back at her mother's memorial. The evening sun gilds the inscription as old Jack joins her, his weathered face thoughtful. "Got word from some folks over in Dakota Territory," he says. "They've heard about what we're doing here. Want to know if we'd consider helping them set up their own academy." Clara touches the brass compass, feeling it's familiar. "Wait, what do you think, old Jack? Ready for some more teaching?" The old marksman's eyes twinkle. "Way I see it, your mother started something bigger than she knew. Thunder Valley's just the beginning. There's a whole frontier out there waiting to learn what she taught us, that justice belongs to those brave enough to stand for it." As twilight settles over Thunder Valley, Clara makes her evening rounds. The town has changed so much since that winter morning when she first took up her mother's Winchester, yet its heart remains the same. Every lit window, every peaceful street, every confident face she passes tells the story of people who've learned to stand together. The brass compass guides her home as stars begin to appear above the Montana hills. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new students, new opportunities to spread the light her mother first kindled. But tonight, in the growing darkness, Clara Blackwood walks the streets of her town with quiet pride, knowing that Sarah's legacy lives on in every life touched by Thunder Valley's example. Justice, it turns out, isn't just about law and order. It's about courage and community, about ordinary people choosing to stand together against darkness. And as long as there are those willing to teach these truths, to light the way for others, hope will always have a home on the frontier. 1 year after Lucas Thorne's defeat, Thunder Valley hosts its first Territorial Peace Officers Convention. Lawmen and women from across 3 territories gather to share knowledge and celebrate a new era of frontier justice. The autumn air carries the scent of wood smoke and possibility as badges of all shapes and sizes catch the morning light. Clara stands on the Academy's front porch, watching as yet another group of riders approaches. Her mother's Winchester rests comfortably across her back, more a symbol now than a weapon of necessity. The brass compass at her throat has gained a companion, a silver medallion marking her position as Territorial Director of Peace Officer. "Training!" "Quite a crowd," Catherine observes, joining her friend. As Chief Deputy of Thunder Valley, she's been instrumental in organizing this gathering. Got folks from as far as Wyoming and Dakota territories. Even some Pinkerton agents want to learn our methods. The Academy grounds have been transformed for the occasion. Training ranges buzz with activity as experienced peacekeepers share techniques. In the main hall, William Blackwood leads a discussion on community-based law enforcement, drawing on Thunder Valley's experiences to show how citizens and lawmen can work together. "Marshal Blackwood!" Tommy Anderson calls out, hurrying up the steps. He wears his own badge now, having recently taken the position of sheriff in Pine Ridge. "You need to see this. Just got word from the territorial capital. The governor's signed the Community Defense Act." Clara takes the telegram, reading quickly. The new law, inspired by Thunder Valley's example, officially recognizes the right of towns to establish their own peacekeeping academies and citizen defense organizations. More importantly, it provides funding and support for communities wanting to follow Thunder Valley's model. "Your mother would have loved this," says a familiar voice. Old Jack approaches, leading a group of visiting lawmen. Despite his formal instructor's coat, his trusty rifle still rides in its familiar position. "Remember what she wrote in that last journal entry? About hoping someday the law would recognize that justice belongs to everyone, not just those with badges?" Before Clara can respond, a commotion draws their attention to the main gate. Michael Cooper rides in, his federal marshal's badge gleaming, followed by a wagon carrying an unexpected cargo, crates of documents and ledgers. "Final evidence from the Hawthorne-Thorne investigation," he announces, swinging down from his horse. "Federal judge says it belongs here, in the Academy's library. Wants future peacekeepers to study how corruption takes root, so they can better fight it." The morning unfolds into a series of demonstrations and discussions. Clara watches with pride as Thunder Valley's graduates show visitors the techniques that help them stand against Thorne's men. But it's more than just shooting and tactics. Each lesson emphasizes judgment, restraint, and the importance of community trust. "Got something to show you," William says quietly, drawing Clara aside. He leads her to a new addition to the Academy's main hall, a wall of photographs and news clippings chronicling the changes spreading across the frontier. There's Pine Ridge's first graduating class, including 3 women trained in Thunder Valley's methods. A story about former Hawthorne territory, judges being replaced by elected officials, Pictures of new academies opening in distant towns, each built on the principles Sarah Blackwood first taught beneath an old cottonwood tree. "Your mother started something bigger than she knew," William says, his voice thick with emotion. "Every time another town stands up to corruption, every time ordinary folks learn they don't have to live in fear, that's her legacy growing stronger." The afternoon brings a special ceremony that Clara has been anticipating for months. On the Academy's parade ground, before a crowd of visitors and townspeople, she pins badges on the newest class of graduating peacekeepers. Each one represents a community choosing to stand against injustice. Among them is Mary Wilson, daughter of one of Hawthorne's former men. After her father's arrest, she could have hidden in shame. Instead, she enrolled in the academy, determined to help repair the damage her family had done. Clara sees in her face the same determination she once saw in her own reflection. "The badge you wear today," Clara tells the graduates, "isn't just a symbol of authority. It's a promise to your communities, a commitment to the principles that built Thunder Valley. Remember that true strength isn't in the gun you carry or the star you wear. It's in the trust people place in you and how you honor that trust." As the sun begins to set, the convention moves to McPherson's saloon for a celebration. The old saloon keeper has expanded his establishment, adding a proper dining room where once only hardened drinkers gathered. Today it's filled with the sound of shared stories and hopeful plans. Clara makes her rounds, listening to tales from across the frontier. A sheriff from Wyoming describes how his town drove out corrupt cattle barons using Thunder Valley's tactics. A young deputy from Dakota Territory shares how women in his community are organizing their own shooting clubs. Each story adds another thread to the tapestry of change. "Makes you wonder what's next," Catherine muses, joining Clara at her usual table. "Seems like every week brings news of another town standing up, another community deciding they don't have to accept the old ways. Future's coming whether we're ready or not," Cooper adds, pulling up a chair. "Railroads pushing west, bringing new challenges, but thanks to what started here, folks are better prepared to face them." The conversation is interrupted by Reverend Walsh, who's been coordinating with other towns to establish a network of safe havens for those fleeing corruption and violence. "Got word from that new settlement up north," he reports, "the one being built by families who lost their lands to men like Hawthorne. They're asking if we'll help them set up their own academy." Clara touches the brass compass at her throat, feeling its familiar weight. The instrument that once guided her mother through frontier dangers now seems to point toward new horizons of possibility. Tell them yes, she decides, but not just about shooting and fighting. They need to learn everything: how to organize, how to build trust, how to turn survivors into defenders. As night falls over Thunder Valley, lanterns illuminate the academy grounds where visitors and townspeople mingle. Clara spots old Jack teaching a group of young deputies one of her mother's special techniques, while William shares stories with visiting lawmen about Sarah's early days fighting corruption. The brass compass grows warm against her skin as Clara makes her way to the memorial garden. New flowers bloom around her mother's headstone, planted by grateful students and citizens. The inscription catches the lantern light. Her courage lit the way for many, and her light still shines. You know what your mother would say about all this. Old Jack's voice comes from behind her. He moves quietly for an old man, another skill he's passed on to countless students. That it's just the beginning, Clara replies, smiling. That as long as there are people willing to stand together, willing to fight for justice instead of power, there's hope for the frontier. Something like that, he agrees. Though she'd probably add something about keeping your powder dry and your conscience clear. Thunder Valley has changed since that winter morning when Clara first took up her mother's Winchester. The shadows of fear that once darkened its streets have given way to the light of community and courage. But more than that, it's become a beacon for others. proof that ordinary people can stand against corruption and win. As Clara walks back toward the celebration, she passes the Academy's newest addition, a practice range dedicated specifically to teaching Sarah Blackwood's techniques. Above it hangs a sign bearing her mother's favorite saying, "Justice belongs to those brave enough to stand together." The night air carries the sound of music and laughter from McPherson's, mixed with the quiet conversations of peacekeepers planning for tomorrow's challenges. Somewhere in the darkness, a lone coyote calls, a reminder that the frontier, though changing, remains wild and full of possibilities. Clara's hand finds the brass compass, its shape as familiar as her own heartbeat. Tomorrow will bring new students, new challenges, new opportunities to spread the light her mother first kindled. But tonight, beneath the star-filled Montana sky, she allows herself a moment of quiet pride. Sarah Blackwood's legacy lives on, not just in her daughter's actions, but in every badge pinned on a graduate's chest, every community finding its strength, every story of ordinary people standing together against injustice. 2 years after Clara Blackwood first took up her mother's Winchester, Thunder Valley stands as a testament to what courage and community can achieve. The morning sun paints the Academy's new buildings in gold as Clara reads a letter that will change everything once again. The territorial governor's seal marks it as official, but it's the contents that take her breath away. "They want to make it national," she tells Catherine, who's reviewing training reports at her desk. "A network of academies across all Western territories based on Thunder Valley's model. Full federal funding and support." Catherine looks up, understanding the magnitude of what this means. Your mother's dream, reaching all the way to Washington. The brass compass warms against Clara's throat as she remembers those early days, when standing up to Hawthorne seemed almost impossible. Now Thunder Valley's methods are being studied and adopted across the frontier. The old ways of corruption and intimidation are giving way to something new, something built on trust and shared strength. Marshal Blackwood, Tommy Anderson's voice carries urgency as he bursts into the office. Now a full instructor at the Academy, he's grown into a confident young man. "Riders coming in from the north. Looks like that group from the Canadian territories we've been hearing about." Clara moves to the window, watching as a dozen riders approach. Their badges catch the morning light. Royal Canadian Mounted Police come to study Thunder Valley's methods. Word of what happened here has spread even beyond American borders. "Your mother would have loved this," William says, joining her at the window. Though his hair has more silver now, his eyes still carry the same quiet strength. "Remember what she wrote in that last journal entry, about hoping someday the whole frontier would learn to stand together." The morning unfolds into a series of moments that showcase how far Thunder Valley has come. In the Academy's main hall, Old Jack teaches advanced marksmanship to a class that includes former outlaws turned peacekeepers. The shooting range echoes with practiced shots as Catherine demonstrates Sarah Blackwood's techniques to the Canadian visitors. But it's in the small moments that Clara sees the real change. A young girl watching the training with determined eyes, just as Clara once watched. Her mother, former enemies working together to protect their communities. People who once lived in fear, now standing tall, knowing they're not alone. The afternoon brings a special ceremony that Clara has been planning for months. On the Academy grounds, beneath the old cottonwood tree where her mother first taught her to shoot, a new memorial is being dedicated, not just to Sarah Blackwood this time, but to all those who helped transform the frontier. "This tree," Clara tells the gathered crowd, "has seen both the darkness and the light of our journey. Under its branches, my mother taught me that true strength comes from standing together. Here, Old Jack trained generations of peacekeepers. And here, Thunder Valley first learned that ordinary people can overcome any evil if they refuse to stand alone." The memorial bears hundreds of names now, not just those who died fighting corruption, but those who lived to build something better. Among them are former enemies who found redemption, like Mary Wilson, whose father once rode with Hawthorne, but who now serves as a deputy in Pine Ridge. As Clara speaks, she notices faces in the crowd that tell their own stories of transformation. McPherson, his saloon now a gathering place for honest folk instead of outlaws. Reverend Walsh, whose church basement once hid refugees from corruption and now hosts community meetings. Cooper, wearing his federal marshal's badge with the same quiet dignity that once helped him survive undercover in Hawthorne's organization. 2 years ago, Clara continues, Thunder Valley faced a choice. We could submit to fear and corruption, accepting them as natural law, or we could stand together and prove that justice belongs to those brave enough to defend it. The choice we made that day rippled across the frontier, showing others they could make the same choice. She touches the brass compass at her throat, drawing strength from its familiar weight. But the real change wasn't in the battles we won or the academies we built. It was in the hearts of ordinary people who discovered their own courage. Every time someone stands up to corruption, every time a community chooses to defend itself, instead of submitting to fear, that's my mother's legacy growing stronger. The ceremony continues as the sun begins to set, painting the Montana sky in colors that seem to echo Sarah Blackwood's own declaration. That hope, like dawn, always returns if you're brave enough to wait for it. The Canadian Mounties mingle with local peacekeepers, sharing stories and techniques, while new students watch and learn. Later, as twilight settles over Thunder Valley, Clara finds herself back at her mother's original memorial. The brass compass seems to grow warmer as she reads the inscription that started it all. Her courage lit the way for many, and her light still shines. Got something to show you, old Jack says, approaching with his familiar quiet step. From his coat, he produces a worn leather journal, one Clara has never seen before. Found this while clearing out some old boxes. It's your mother's first. A journal from before she met your father. Clara opens it carefully, recognizing her mother's younger handwriting. The pages tell stories of early fights against corruption, of lessons learned and allies made. But more importantly, they tell of hope that someday the scattered defenders of justice would unite. Look at the last entry, old Jack suggests. Clara turns to the final page, where her mother's words bring fresh tears to her eyes. Today I saw something that gave me hope. A young deputy in Helena standing up to men twice his size because it was right. He reminded me that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and standing your ground anyway. Someday I dream of a frontier where such courage isn't rare, where ordinary people stand together against injustice. Until then, I'll keep fighting, keep teaching, and keep lighting the way for others to follow. The sound of hoofbeats draws their attention. Through the gathering dusk, more riders approach. Representatives from newly established academies across the territories come to share knowledge and build stronger bonds. Each carries a story of communities transforming, of people finding their strength. Your mother's dream came true, old Jack says softly, though maybe not quite how she imagined it. Clara watches as Catherine greets the newcomers, her deputy's badge catching the last light of day. Nearby, William talks with a group of young peacekeepers, sharing stories of Sarah's early days. The academy grounds hum with activity as students practice under lamplight, each one carrying forward the legacy of courage and community. No, Clara agrees, touching the brass compass one more time. It came true better than she could have imagined. As night falls over Thunder Valley, the stars emerge one by one like distant beacons of hope. Clara makes her final rounds, checking on students and visitors, ensuring everything is secure. But it's different now, no longer the tense vigilance of earlier days, but the peaceful watchfulness of a community that knows its strength. The brass compass guides her home through the familiar streets, past the places where history was made, and lives were changed. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new students, new opportunities to spread the light her mother first kindled. But tonight, under the vast Montana sky, Clara Blackwood walks with quiet pride, knowing that Sarah's legacy lives on in ways she never could have dreamed. Thunder Valley has become more than just a town that stood up to corruption. It's become a symbol of hope, a proving ground for the idea that justice belongs to everyone brave enough to defend it. And as long as there are those willing to stand together, to teach and learn, to light the way for others, that hope will continue to spread across the frontier, carried forward by ordinary people who've discovered their own extraordinary courage. The story of the rancher's daughter who took up her mother's Winchester has become legend now, told around campfires and in saloons across the territories. But the real story, Clara knows, isn't about guns or badges or battles won. It's about the courage to stand together, the strength found in community, and the undying belief that ordinary people can change the world if they refuse to stand alone. As the last light fades from the western sky, Clara returns to the academy where new students practice by lamplight, preparing to carry Thunder Valley's lessons to their own communities. The brass compass rests warm against her heart, no longer just a guide through physical terrain, but a reminder of the path her mother first blazed, a path that now stretches across the frontier, lighting the way for all who dare to follow it. The next morning brings another kind of celebration to Thunder Valley. The Academy's grounds host a unique graduation ceremony, the first class of international students completing their training. Among them are not just the Canadian Mounties, but representatives from as far as the Mexican territories, and even a deputy from Alaska. Never thought I'd see the day, McPherson muses, watching as Clara pins badges on the graduates. Folk coming from thousands of miles away to learn what your mother started teaching under that old cottonwood tree. Each graduate represents a community choosing a new path. Maria Gonzalez, daughter of a Mexican rancher who lost everything to corruption, stands proud as she receives her certification. Next to her, James Running Wolf from the nearby Blackfeet Nation accepts his badge, the first of his people to train at the academy, but not the last. Your mother's methods work because they're based on truth, old Jack explains to a group of visiting officials. Don't matter if you're in Montana or Mexico, people are stronger together than alone. Corruption only wins when communities are divided. The ceremony is interrupted by an unexpected arrival. A group of riders approaches from the east, led by a face Clara hasn't seen in years, Michael Shadowhand Cooper, the man who helped bring down Hawthorne's empire. But it's who rides beside him that draws gasps from the crowd. Richard Hawthorne Jr., son of the man who once terrorized Thunder Valley, dismounts before Clara. Unlike his father's arrogance, the young man's bearing shows humility. "Marshal Blackwood," he says formally, "I've come to make things right." In his saddlebags, he carries documents, deeds and titles to lands his father stole, now being returned to their rightful owners. But more than that, he brings a request to enroll in the academy, to learn how to protect people instead of exploiting them. "Your father would be proud," Clara tells Cooper later, as they watch young Hawthorne begin his training under Catherine's watchful eye. "Taking a chance on redemption instead of revenge." "Learned that from your mother too," Cooper replies. "She always said the hardest victory isn't defeating your enemies, it's turning them into allies." The day unfolds with more revelations of Thunder Valley's growing influence. A telegraph arrives from the territorial capital. The governor has signed legislation making community defense training mandatory for all new peace officers. Another wire brings news from Dakota Territory. 3 more towns have driven out corrupt officials using Thunder Valley's methods. Clara walks the academy grounds, remembering how it all began. A young woman with her mother's Winchester, standing against impossible odds. Now, the shooting ranges echo with multiple languages as students from across the frontier learn to defend their communities. The classroom walls display maps showing the spread of trained peacekeepers like ripples in a pond spreading ever outward. "Got something else to show you," William says, leading Clara to the academy's library. A new section has been added, filled with journals and records from communities that have successfully stood up to corruption. Each volume tells a story of ordinary people finding their courage, of towns transforming from victims to defenders. "This one came in yesterday," he says, handing her a leather-bound book. "From a mining town in Colorado. They used our tactics to drive out a corrupt mining company that was poisoning their water. Said reading about Thunder Valley gave them the courage to stand together." As evening approaches, Clara finds herself once again beneath the cottonwood tree. But this time she's not alone. Around her gather the graduates, the visiting officials, the townspeople who made everything possible. Old Jack steps forward, his weathered face solemn. "Been saving this for the right moment," he says, producing a small wooden box. Inside lies a silver star, Sarah Blackwood's original marshal's badge from her days in Helena. "Found it among her things. Reckon now's the time for it to see the light again." Clara lifts the badge carefully, feeling its weight. Not just physical, but historical. "What do you think, old Jack? Have we lived up to her legacy?" The old marksman's eyes sweep across the gathered crowd. Former enemies, now allies, students, becoming teachers, ordinary people who found their courage. "We've done more than that," he says softly. "We've proven she was right all along. Justice really does belong to those brave enough to stand together." As the sun sets on Thunder Valley, casting long shadows across the academy grounds, Clara reflects on the journey that brought them here. The brass compass at her throat no longer just points north. It points toward a future where courage and community overcome corruption and fear. A young girl approaches, perhaps 12 years old, her eyes bright with determination. "Marshal Blackwood?" she asks shyly. "Will you tell us the story again, about how it all began?" Clara looks around at the eager faces, students, peacekeepers, and townspeople gathered to hear a tale that's become legend. She touches her mother's badge, now pinned beside her own, and begins, "It started with a choice, the kind of choice every person, every community eventually faces. Stand alone in fear, or stand together with courage. This is the story of Thunder Valley's choice, of a mother's legacy, and of ordinary people who proved that justice belongs to all who dare to defend it." The night deepens as Clara tells the tale, but lanterns bloom across the academy grounds like earthbound stars. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new students, new opportunities to spread the light Sarah Blackwood first kindled. But tonight, under the vast Montana sky, the legacy of the rancher's daughter, who took up her mother's Winchester, lives on, not just in stories and songs, but in the hearts of all who choose to stand together against injustice. The brass compass rests warm against Clara's heart as the last words of the story fade into the night air. Around her, faces glow with understanding and purpose, each person carrying a spark of the same fire that her mother lit so many years ago. The frontier stretches vast and wild before them, full of challenges and opportunities, but no longer ruled by fear and corruption. For in Thunder Valley and beyond, people have learned the most important lesson of all, that true justice isn't found in the fastest gun or the highest badge, but in the courage of ordinary people who refuse to stand alone. And as long as that lesson spreads, as long as communities choose to stand together, Sarah Blackwood's light will continue to shine, guiding the way toward a future where justice belongs to all who dare to defend it. 5 years have passed since Clara Blackwood first took up her mother's Winchester to defend Thunder Valley. The frontier has changed in ways few could have imagined, but some things remain constant, like the morning sun painting the Academy's buildings in gold as Clara makes her rounds. The brass compass at her throat has gained new companions over the years. Her mother's original marshal's badge, the silver medallion of the territorial director, and now a newly minted federal star. But it's still the compass that guides her, just as Sarah Blackwood's principles continue to light the way. "Ryder coming in fast," calls young Emma Anderson from her lookout position. Tommy's sister has grown into a fine peacekeeper herself, carrying on the family's new tradition of service. Through her spyglass, Clara spots the approaching horseman, Michael Cooper's son, riding hard from the territorial capital. "Official word from Washington," he announces, handing over a sealed document. "Congress has approved the National Peacekeepers Training Act. Thunder Valley's methods will become the standard across all Western territories." The news spreads quickly through the town, which has grown into something Sarah Blackwood might not recognize, but would surely approve of. The Academy now occupies most of the northern quarter, its ranges and classrooms full of students from across the continent. The main street, once dominated by Hawthorne's thugs, hosts businesses owned by people who stood together against corruption. "Your mother dreamed big," old Jack says, joining Clara on the Academy's porch. Age has finally convinced him to retire from active instruction, but he still mentors special students. But I don't think even she imagined this. Before them stretches the morning assembly of the Academy's current class. 200 students from 3 nations, including faces that would have been unthinkable 5 years ago. Women wearing badges. With confidence, Native American peacekeepers training alongside territorial marshals, even a contingent from the Hawaiian Islands, come to learn Thunder Valley's methods. "Got visitors coming," Catherine announces, emerging from her office where she serves as the Academy's chief instructor. A special delegation from the East Coast. Seems some of the bigger cities are having similar problems with corruption. Want to learn how frontier towns handle it. Clara watches as William Blackwood leads an advanced shooting demonstration. Her father's limp is more pronounced now, but his spirit remains strong as ever. Under his guidance, students learn not just marksmanship, but the principles that make it meaningful. "Remember," he tells them, his voice carrying across the range, "the gun is just a tool. Your real weapon is the community standing behind you. That's what my wife understood, what Thunder Valley proved, and what each of you must carry home." The morning unfolds with a series of moments that showcase how far they've come. McPherson, now running the largest hotel west of the Mississippi, hosts a meeting of the Territorial Business Association focused on ensuring fair practices and standing against corruption. Reverend Walsh leads a delegation of Native American elders touring the Academy, part of a new initiative to bridge old divides. But it's in the Academy's library where Clara finds the most striking evidence of change. The walls are lined with journals and records from hundreds of communities that have successfully stood against corruption. Each volume tells a story of ordinary people finding their courage, of towns transforming from victims to defenders. "Marshal Blackwood?" A young voice draws her attention. A girl of about 12 stands in the doorway wearing a handmade deputy's badge. "Could you tell us about the day you first stood up to Hawthorne? The other students want to hear it again." Clara follows the girl to where a group of younger students has gathered in the memorial garden. The old cottonwood tree still stands proud, its branches sheltering Sarah Blackwood's memorial and the wall of names that has grown alongside it. Each name tells a story of courage, of choosing to stand together instead of submitting to fear. As Clara begins the familiar tale, she notices faces in the crowd that tell their own stories of transformation. Richard Hawthorne Jr., now a respected instructor, specializing in turning former outlaws toward justice. Maria Gonzalez, who took Thunder Valley's methods back to Mexico and helped establish 3 new academies. James Running Wolf, whose program bringing Native American peacekeeping traditions into the curriculum has enriched everyone's understanding of justice. The story is interrupted by the arrival of more riders, the Eastern delegation, led by a face Clara hasn't seen in years. Michael Cooper himself, now a senior federal marshal, escorts a group of city police chiefs and reform-minded politicians. "Had to show them myself," Cooper explains later as they tour the academy grounds. "They wouldn't believe the reports. A frontier town that defeated corruption not just with guns, but with community. A training system that turns ordinary citizens into defenders of justice, a place where old enemies learn to work together." The afternoon brings one of Clara's favorite academy traditions, the Defenders Pledge Ceremony. Each graduating student receives not just a badge, but a brass compass similar to the one Sarah Blackwood once carried. "Let it guide you," Clara tells them, "not just through physical territory, but through the moral challenges you'll face. Remember that the true north isn't just about direction, it's about staying true to the principles that make justice possible." As evening approaches, Clara finds herself once again beneath the cottonwood tree. But this time, she's not alone. Around her gather the people who made everything possible. Catherine, whose steady friendship helped build the Academy's foundation. Old Jack, whose wisdom shaped generations of peacekeepers. William Blackwood, whose quiet strength never wavered. "Got something to show you," her father says, producing a package wrapped in oilcloth. Inside lies Sarah Blackwood's last unread journal, sealed until now. "Your mother wrote this the week before she died, said it wasn't to be opened until Thunder Valley's example had spread beyond the territory." Clara opens it carefully, recognizing her mother's handwriting. The final entry brings tears to her eyes. To whoever reads this, if you're reading these words, it means the dream lived on. It means ordinary people discovered what I always knew, that justice isn't given by the powerful, but earned by those brave enough to stand together. My greatest hope wasn't just teaching my daughter to shoot straight, but showing her that one person's courage can light the way for many. If you're reading this, it means that light spread further than I could have imagined. Keep it burning. Keep standing together. Keep showing others that they don't have to accept corruption as natural law. The frontier may be vast, but hope spreads faster than fear when people choose to carry it forward. The sun sets over Thunder Valley, painting the sky in colors that seem to echo Sarah Blackwood's own words about hope and courage. The academy grounds glow with lantern light as students continue their evening training, each one preparing to carry Thunder Valley's lessons back to their own communities. Clara touches the brass compass that started it all, feeling its familiar weight. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new students, new opportunities to spread the light her mother first kindled. But tonight, under the vast Montana sky, she allows herself to feel the full weight of what they've accomplished. The story of the rancher's daughter who took up her mother's Winchester has become more than legend now. It's become a promise, a promise that ordinary people can overcome any evil if they refuse to stand alone. That justice belongs not to those with the fastest guns or the most power, but to those brave enough to stand together. As darkness settles over Thunder Valley, the stars emerge one by one like distant beacons of hope. Clara makes her final rounds, checking on students and visitors, ensuring everything is secure. But it's different now, no longer the tense vigilance of earlier days, but the peaceful watchfulness of a legacy secured. The brass compass guides her home through the familiar streets, past the places where history was made and lives were changed. And in the quiet of the Montana night, Clara Blackwood walks with quiet pride, knowing that her mother's light will continue to shine, carried forward by all those who choose to stand together against injustice. For in Thunder Valley and beyond, people have learned the most important lesson of all, that true justice isn't found in the fastest gun or the highest badge, but in the courage of ordinary people who refuse to stand alone. And as long as that lesson spreads, as long as communities choose to stand together, hope will always have a home on the frontier. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.